Please, can we be seated? Hello, hello. Sister.
I wanted to mention, sir, that
Yes.
in railway, I called to railway. And then I don't know whether with the question of...
Good evening and welcome to The Candidates, a four-part presidential town hall series brought to you by Daria Media and the Nigerian Television Authority with the support of the MacArthur Foundation. These town halls represent an opportunity for you to get to know the candidates who want your votes so they can lead Nigeria for the next 4 years. We are live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority, on Wazobia Television, Orc TV, Plus TV, and Impact Africa Television. You can also hear this program on all Radio Nigeria stations across the country, and we are streaming live online at dtv.media and nta.ng live. Today, we are in conversation with the candidates of the ruling All Progressives Congress, the APC. Retired General Muhammadu Buhari was born on the 17th of December 1942 and is currently serving as the Commander-in-Chief of Nigerian Armed Forces and the President. He's a retired Major General in the Nigerian Army and previously served as the nation's head of state from 31st December 1983 to 27th August 1985, following a military coup. In December 2014, he emerged as the presidential candidate of the All Progressives Congress for the March 2015 general elections. He won those elections, defeating the incumbent president, Goodluck Jonathan. This marked the first time in the history of Nigeria that an incumbent president on Twitter at The Daria Media or NTA News Now, on Facebook at The Daria Media, on Instagram at Daria Media NG. Now, throughout these programs, these handles will scroll on your screen, and don't forget to use the hashtag NGTheCandidates. Otherwise, your questions may get lost. Again, remember to tell your friends and family in the diaspora that they can watch this program online. We are streaming live on dtv.media and NTA NG Live. Now, let me turn to Mr. President and Mr. Vice President. You've been ruling Nigeria now for close to 3, almost 4 years. You want Nigerians to give you another opportunity to do another 4 years. Why?
Well, I said it much earlier at our national executive committee of our party, that if my party recommends me to its executive, I will contest. And I did that to save time and wide discussions among members of the party. So those who felt very strongly about it, they left the party. And the party nominated me. Why? Is because I felt that the three fundamental objectives we campaigned on in 2015 are still relevant. And we want to remind Nigerians to see when we started, 2015, where we are now, what we have been able to do in between this time of 3.5 years with the resources and the time available to us.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. Vice President, do you want to add a little bit more to tell us a little bit more about why you think the Nigerian public should nominate you and Mr. President again to serve for another 4 years?
Yes, I think so. I think Mr. President has already pointed out that we campaigned on three fundamental issues, namely the economy, corruption, and the fight against corruption and security. And in those three respects, we believe that we have laid very strong foundations, and I very strongly believe that we are on to much more progress if given a second opportunity. I very strongly take the view that the period of 3.5 years in particular has been one where we have managed to turn around a lot of what was inherited in the previous 16 years. And the previous 16 years were, in my view, a period which a lot of revenue came in, but very little appeared to have been done. And we believe that the foundations we've laid in agriculture, foundations we've laid, and I'm sure Mr. President will elaborate on that as we go on, in infrastructure, the foundations we've laid there really deserve a second time for completion. But I'm sure we'll come around to those specific issues.
Absolutely. But you talked about the three things that you fought the first elections with and which you think you've done well. So maybe if we could take them one by one and see whether we can have a conversation. Let's start with corruption, because that was a big thing that the president fought on. There's a perception that the general corruption fight that we see under this administration is a little bit skewed, and that it focuses on people who are not pro-government or who are not friends of this government or who belong to an opposition party. How do you respond to those allegations?
Which allegations?
That your corruption fight focuses only on people who are opponents of the APC or who are not friends of the APC.
Well, I think that's not a fair criticism or observation, because it's not backed by facts. I don't think there is anybody that has been pointed out as corrupt in the last dispensation, which we look the other direction. I think I can best illustrate my experiences on this. When I came in uniform in 1984, we arrested the president, the vice president, the governors, the ministers, and put them in detention and said they are guilty until they can prove themselves innocent. We put committees of investigation almost based on geopolitical zones. And those that were investigated, except two Nigerians, late Biamun Usman, a junior minister of education, and late Adam Chiroma, a governor of Central Bank, and a minister of finance, were the only people who were found to have managed their resources with integrity. But I myself eventually was arrested and detained, and those people who were found guilty of misappropriating public funds were given back what they were misappropriating through thorough committee investigation. It's not just an allegation. They were given the chance to talk. So I decided to come now, and now I have to be careful. People are just not arrested like that, but when they hold positions, if they made a wrong declaration, it's just one point. They didn't mention how many houses they have in Europe and America or Asia. And they didn't mention the companies they floated and the contract they gave them. It's eventually uncovered. They are faced in court with the documents.
So, Mr. President, you're here obviously referring to the case of the Chief Justice of the Federation. Or who are you referring to? Is that an example? Because you talked about people who are not declaring. This is what is topical now, and I'm wondering whether that is the case you're referring to.
I'm sorry, you have to repeat that question again.
Okay. Let me ask it another way. You've talked about people who do wrongdoing and being investigated. There are cases of people that are thought to be very close to you. An example is the former secretary to the federal government, Malam Babachir, allegedly accused of taking money that was meant for IDPs and awarding contracts to himself. As far as we know, the EFCC has not investigated him, even though he has lost his job. He is one of few other examples of people who are in government, who've got petitions against them in front of the EFCC, and the EFCC is not investigating. And the general perception is that the reason why those investigations are not taking place is because these are people who are either close to the government or who are in government.
Well, I'm not too clear about your question, but if you can mention the names.
I'll give you an example.
Yes.
I said Babachir, the former SGF, the Minister of Housing, Mr. Raji Fashola. There's a petition in front of the EFCC by an NGO. And as far as I know, that has not been investigated. So I'm trying to understand whether you are aware of these things and if this is part of, as it is alleged, part of a policy not to investigate people in government.
Well, we can't, to be fair to individuals, I told you why I have to be careful. And if anybody, the public should help us. If there are strong allegations and people backed it up by evidence, bank accounts, names of companies floated, contracts awarded, then we take them before the courts through EFCC and ICPC. And we have to trust the system and allow them to complete the investigation. If we just take people in, as we did during the military area, and lock them up, this system, the present system, multi-party democratic system, does not approve that. If you accuse any person, you have to produce the evidence in court for him to be prosecuted. So if there is strong allegation, the government may decide to ask people to go, like the former secretary to the government you mentioned. We ask him to go. But if anybody...
But the question is, after asking him to go, how come he hasn't been prosecuted? Which is what Nigerians are wondering. If there was a strong enough evidence to ask him to go, it means there's an indication that maybe he did something wrong. Why hasn't he been presented before a court and charged with corrupt practices?
It's still before. I think the matter is already before the EFCC. And I believe that, in fact, a directive has been issued regarding all persons who have cases before the EFCC. I'm sure that you will find that each and every person who has an allegation against them and has been duly investigated will be put on trial, without a doubt. Each person.
Okay. Let me specifically come to you, because yes, the National Assembly has also raised what they say are concerns about money that was misspent within the presidential unit on the Northeast. You chair that unit, and they say you basically appropriated money without going through due protocol. How do you respond to that allegation?
No, I think the allegation was that some money, which was approved for the emergency intervention in the Northeast, was without appropriation.
Yes.
But that's not correct at all. And we pointed out very clearly to them that while I was acting president, the sums of money in question were duly appropriated. As a matter of fact, if they had looked, and we've shown all the evidence to them, and I do not think that we have since got a reply from them, what we were able to show them was very clearly this. The CBN, that's the Central Bank of Nigeria, controls the strategic reserves, agricultural strategic reserves. They are the ones who would raise a memo to me saying specifically what was required for the Northeast intervention and where the funds will be taken from. The funds were taken from what is called a rice levy, which is a duly appropriated fund. And after that, I then approved the sum of money, properly appropriated.
Are you at all concerned about some of the allegations raised about that, the spending with that particular fund and the way they are running the affairs of the agency?
I'm not at all concerned about it. I believe that, unfortunately, a good part of that was politicized and, allegations are flying here and there. That was a very comprehensive, very, very comprehensive process. What happened was that after the World Food Program had said that they were no longer able to feed the numbers that they were feeding before, there was a need for us to intervene because hundreds of people were coming out.
So it was an emergency situation?
Oh, yes, it was an emergency situation. And then what then happened was, we then took a very detailed process. I said it started from the central bank and the strategic reserves. We have 4 companies that hold our strategic reserves, and they are major grain companies: Olam, Walcott, Dangote. I believe there's one more that I can't remember their name. They hold the strategic reserves for the central bank. So everything was done properly. The Nigerian armed forces, the army, the air force, the navy, all of them, the police, all of them were involved in the distribution process, including the air force. Each service chief sent a senior representative to be involved in the process of distribution. We then went a further step. We created an office in Maiduguri where we have a tracking device. We could actually see the the trucks, as they went from point to point from our offices in Maiduguri. We then included members of the National Assembly from the Northeast Zone to ensure that they were carried along and they understood what exactly.
So why do you think the National Assembly would make such a serious allegation?
Well, the National Assembly, as you know, I think that what they were saying was, and the reason why they were saying whatever they said, it will be left to them. But I think that as far as we are concerned, we went through the appropriate process and we did the distribution appropriately. I don't know exactly. If you look at the entire report, the only line of that report where there was any kind of allegation, at least against me, was to say the money was not duly appropriated by the National Assembly. But we proved that that money was duly appropriated by the National Assembly, and there was no further allegation, as far as I could see, concerning my participation as acting president at the time.
Now, the National Assembly, in talking about this, quoted Section 80, subsection 4, which basically says that you can't appropriate any money, whether it's from the consolidated account or anything considered public funds, without going to the National Assembly. And in their view, that process didn't take place.
The point I'm making is that their view was absolutely wrong because it wasn't based on facts. We provided for them evidence that they obviously did not have at the time when they were making their conclusion. And that evidence was the fact that the Central Bank of Nigeria was the one that originated the memorandum from an appropriated fund. That fund is called the rice levy. The rice levy is a line item in our budget, so it's already appropriated by the National Assembly.
Okay.
So I think that they were wrong.
Yeah, let's open up the conversation. This is a town hall. I don't want to dominate it. I want to give people an opportunity to ask questions. So there are 2 mics, and we'll call maybe 2-3 people. Please introduce yourself, ask your question, go back and sit down, and then we'll come back to Mr. President and Mr. Vice President. Okay, so the gentleman in glasses, yes, please, from this end. At the other end, yes, sir, you. And then there's a lady right at the back, I think, and the gentleman in the brown hat as well. Okay.
Good evening, Your Excellency. My name is Usman Suleiman Jawun. I'm a lawyer. Now, my question is specifically to Mr. President on the issue of Al-Majiri. Now, I'm sure this issue, Al-Majiri in the northern Al-Majiri, yeah. Yeah. Your Excellency, this, I believe, a major challenge for us in the northern part of the country. Now, I'm sure so many don't believe it's something we should continue to do. So what's your opinion on that? And I strongly think it's important, Your Excellency, if you can do something about it. Now, this is because we've seen it that you're one of those that can make difficult decisions and that can be accepted in Nigeria.
Okay.
The fuel subsidy, for example.
No,
so I do believe.
Your question is about
now I do
I've got
believe
other people who need to talk.
Yeah, I do believe if Mr. President can do something about it, I'm sure it can help that acceptance.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. The next person, please. Yes, sir. Please come. Yes.
Good evening, Mr. President, sir. Please, my question is this. How soon will be
Please,
national...
can you introduce yourself?
My name is Usman Abubakar, a teacher. How soon will be National Livestock Development Plan will be implemented so as to address the challenges facing this sector? Thank you, Mr. President.
Livestock.
Huh?
Livestock plan.
National Livestock.
I will talk about it. I will talk about it. I'm the chairman of the... I will talk
What is it?
Okay.
National Livestock
Thank
Plan.
you, sir.
Oh, livestock plan.
Yes.
Okay.
My name is Richard Ezekiel. I stand here on behalf of 25 million persons with disabilities in Nigeria. I just want to ask how far about the disability bill?
Okay.
How far about?
With the disability bill. The disability bill. Yes.
Disability.
Yes. We'll take one more question.
About the disability
and then
bill.
We'll come back
the
to
bill
Mr. President and Mr. Vice
for
President.
National Assembly. It hasn't gone very far.
Good evening, Mr. President. My name is Omotayo Motosho, a television broadcaster. I remember when I interviewed you about 2.5 years ago, you did mention a very, very germane point, that if we don't fight corruption, corruption will kill us. I stand here today, Mr. President, with a heavy heart to let you know that the corruption that you are fighting, some Nigerians are not supporting, and we must support you. What caused the heavy heart? If we had been fighting corruption collectively with you, we would have been able to save some good funds to divert onto other sectors of our economy. Okay. On December 22nd, I lost a close sister of mine with 2 younger sisters in car accident due to bad roads. As a journalist, I know this administration is doing their best, but we do not have enough funds to be able to tidy the bad roads that we have.
Okay, thank you
She
very
died
much.
with 2 other sisters,
Thank
3
you.
daughters of 1 mother on Ijebu-Ode Ore, Benin Road. Chief Mrs. Henrietta Vani and Francisca and the other lady. 3 of them, they are my close relatives. We lost them in that accident. If we fight corruption collectively, I am advising every Nigerian to join this administration to fight corruption.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I have to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll come back to you and Mr. President so that we can answer the questions. Yeah, let's take a quick break. Please don't go away.
The Candidates, a presidential town hall co-production between Daria Media and NTA, supported by the MacArthur Foundation. Kingsley Moghalu and running mate Omar Getso of the Young Progressive Party, Muhammadu Buhari and running mate Yemi Osinbajo of the All Progressives Congress, Omoyele Sowore and running mate Rabiu Ahmed Rufai of the African Action Congress, Atiku Abubakar and running mate Peter Obi of the People's Democratic Party. Moderator Kadri Ahmed. Next town hall, Wednesday, 23rd January, with Omoyele Sowore and running mate Rabiu Ahmed Rufai of the African Action Congress. Town hall venue, Sheraton Hotel, Abuja, from 7 to 9 p.m. The candidates will be broadcast live on NTA and other partner TV and radio stations, as well as streamed online on NTA and dtv.media. If you're over 18 and want to be part of the audience, apply online at daria.media or use the hashtag NGTheCandidates or participate online using the hashtag NGTheCandidates.
Yes, it be like say they want to tell us another story again, yo. Now so, you know, say every they say I be superstar. But for me, the real superstars are those people where they go vote for the candidate of their choice without violence. So for these upcoming elections, be my superstar. Vote. No fights. No violence. Because election will be won. We work together so the future will be brighter.
The beauty of democracy rests in the power the system has given to the teeming population to elect an eligible candidate of their choice for any political office. But the right to vote is not a license to kill. Democracy is government of the people, by the people, for the people, where majority carries the vote. It is not a do-or-die affair. Say no to violence. Your weapon at the poll is your permanent voter's card, not a dagger. Your future is in your hands. You have the right to leave. Don't cause trouble. Vote wisely.
I see the wisdom in your eyes, Mama, and I feel the courage in your heart. You carry strength in your walk, Papa, and compassion in your touch. I see the love in your smile, my sister, and I hear the truth when you talk. You are a winner with your brain, my brother, and a healer with your soul. I see the future in your hands, Niger, when you register and vote. We get power inside us, my friend, but not be power for our fists. This is the power of how to use our head and come together. So stand up. Let us not sit down and look. To Baba say so.
No sit down look.
No sit down look.
No sit down look.
Make una no sit down look, oh.
Welcome back. You are watching The Candidates, a presidential town hall series brought to you by Daria Media and the Nigerian Television Authority with the support of the MacArthur Foundation. We are in conversation with the presidential and vice presidential candidates of the ruling APC, the incumbent president and, of course, the vice president, retired General Muhammadu Buhari, and Professor Yemi Osinbajo. A quick reminder for those watching at home, you can still take part by sending your questions using the social media handles scrolling across the screen. We will do our best to ask as many questions as possible. Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, before the break, we took a few questions from members of the audience. There was a question about what your plans are for the Almajiris in the north. There was a question about the livestock plan. And finally, there was a question about the disability bill. Because there are about 25 million people thought to live with some form of disability in Nigeria, and people are interested in knowing what this government is going to do about improving their situation. Yes, sir. So maybe we start with the Almajiri with Mr. President.
Yes, what the Almajiri case, I think we have to look at the 3 tiers of government responsibilities: the federal, the state, and the local governments, and the allocation of resources, revenue allocation formula, and so on, relative to the resources available to the country. Monies are dispensed to that 3-tier government system. So the question of Almajiri's case, this lack of virtually primary, the basic education, are all local government problems. So even if the center has extra money, they wouldn't take it and build classrooms, equip them, employ qualified teachers from the federal revenue, while it is the duty of the local governments. If the local governments are not being given the money by the governors or by the state, then it's up to the local governments to come together and scream loud enough for Nigerians to hear them, so that there will be proper allocation of resources by the constitutional beings.
Mr. President,
that's for the Almajiris.
Yes, sir. Let me just ask a little follow-up questions regarding that. Part of the frustrations that some people have with the way Nigeria is structured is that we seem to have sometimes confusion. So technically, we'd sort of say something like primary education resides with local government, but then you have agencies like the Universal Basic Education Agency, which is a federal agency and which has some role to play in primary education. And part of this confusion is why people will say, for example, we need to restructure and move some things from exclusive list, from concurrent list to the residual list. What are your thoughts regarding restructuring, particularly in relation to education?
Well, my thought is that firstly, there must be a lot of education. And this I recommend should be led by the press to expose what the relationship, how effective the governments are spending to local governments monies, from the center. If that is not done, then it is very difficult for the federal government under this dispensation to enforce education at all levels by the respective states, either the state, the local governments, or the center itself. I will give, I think, some examples of this. In some of the investigations, it was uncovered that local government chairmen were made to sign for the money that are supposed to be their allocation, but they will only be given about 25% of the money. The rest will be taken by the governor. There are investigations in some of the states that are showing that. So I am expecting the press, on behalf of the people, to make an in-depth investigation and expose corrupt governors, and local government chairmen.
Thank you, sir. Would you be willing to re-examine the UBEC funds? Because those reside with the federal government, and yet they are actually meant for primary education. So they are normally disbursed, I believe, by the federal government.
Well, I think what has happened so far, anyway, with the UBEC, I think there are agencies of government, federal agencies, that in some senses support support local government and states. But the bulk, clearly, primary education, as Mr. President has said, lies squarely in the hands of local governments and all of that. But I think with UBEC, what happened with UBEC is that UBEC has an arrangement where they say if the state, if there's 20 million for a state, they'll say, well, the state should bring its own counterpart funding of a certain amount of money. It could be 20% or 25%. Now, that percentage is what the states ought to bring to the table before they have access to the UBEC fund. Most states never accessed the UBEC funds. They simply said they didn't have the counterpart funding. But what has happened?
Don't you find that problematic, though?
Excuse me. What has happened now? What has happened now is that from the Paris Club refunds that was given to the states, the federal government now paid off all of their counterpart funding. So all states can now access UBEC funds without any hindrance whatsoever.
Okay. Now, the other questions are to do with disability and with the livestock plan. Yes. The livestock plan, I think...
The disability?
Yeah, okay, we'll start with disability. Yes, Mr. President.
Well, I honestly cannot remember the plan being taken to the National Assembly and how much they have commented on it and sent it back to the center. It's the same thing with the disability bill. There are so much with the National Assembly. And unfortunately, as I mentioned, I expect, honestly, the elite, the press through the elite, to keep an eye on the activities, on the bills between the executive and the National Assembly. If the executive send a bill, they can hardly put it in the budget unless it is returned from the National Assembly with their comments or with their recommendations.
So we will find out what's happening with that bill with the National Assembly, and then maybe
But a lot of time has been wasted.
Right. Okay, Mr. President. Now, I'd like to do a little follow-up question regarding this livestock, because we got a question from a listener, and I'll try and dig up their name, where they were asking, how do you intend to bring a permanent stop to the difficulties and the conflict going on between farmers and herdsmen?
I don't answer the question.
No.
Yeah, so the conflict.
Raise your voice.
The conflict between farmers
and
herdsmen, yes, and herders.
Well, what happened started from Benue State was unfortunate. And we foresaw that. When I say we, I mean the federal government. And we asked the Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development to go to the archives and find out the gazettes from the First Republic, where those incredible leadership of the First Republic, there was cattle route, there was grazing areas. With limited resources, they put windmills, earth dams, and even veterinary clinics. But subsequent very important personalities encroached on the cattle routes, on the grazing areas. And if a herder has 200 cattle, they have just eaten, whichever their way to the water point, they will just go through there. And I think the Minister of Agriculture and Water Resources have produced the maps, the encroachment.
But these are old maps, and this is today's problem. So we might have had a solution to this many years ago in the 60s with the routes and everything, but clearly that solution is no longer tenable now. And so the issue is, these are urgent problems that we're facing now. People are dying, people are getting killed, conflict is breaking out. What are we going to do about it, like now?
What we are doing about, we have already started. And we have to ask, especially the governors. The movement is from north to south, and is quite predictable. After the harvest, you know, the cattle have to move southward for water and pasture. And then our borders, for example, between Lake Chad and Benin Republic, about 1,400 kilometers with Niger alone. And look at the Cameroon's one. And to effectively survey that border, when structures were tampered with in terms of cattle routes and grazing areas, it is very difficult. We have sent this in back through the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development to the governors so that we can create these corridors. But for a government like Benue government, when they said they have banned cattle rearing or they have banned grazing. We are in the same country. I expect our government to insist on the routes to be re-established in the grazing areas. But to say that cattle cannot move, it's very difficult. Benue is complaining, but I understand they are already in Bielsa. From there, are they going into the Atlantic?
Okay, Mr. President, yeah, but can I just quickly, because you know, go on.
Let me add a comment to that. Part of what, because when the matter was referred to the governors, I chaired the committee, the National Economic Council, and part of the plan that the National Economic Council laid out was called the Livestock Transformation Plan. All of the governors in the so-called frontline states were also involved in this. And I think that one of the very important points that emerged from the discussions at the National Economic Council was the fact that there was a need to ensure that we were able to create some access to places, to grazing areas. And I think that that's the point also that Mr. President is making, that in order to be, for instance, anywhere where cattle are, you must still have some kind of access, so that you then have an area where it could be a ranch, it could just be a place where you have earth dams, it could be a place where you just have water, where, you know, whatever it is. And we then agreed with the governors that, because federal government has no land, only state governments have land. We then agreed with the state governments that, okay, anyone that is willing, you will put together the resources. If private people want to put together the resources, they can build those areas. They could be called ranches or grazing areas, whatever you call them. And people will pay appropriate fees. The cattle rearers will pay appropriate fees, use the facilities, and go back whenever they want to go back. Because clearly, somebody has to bring those cattle to that point. And we tried to say that that was an interim phase, because as time goes on, you will eventually be able to stop grazing from one point to the other. But that will take time.
Yeah, well, so the point is basically Mr. President himself owes, cattle. Everybody knows. He's very proud of his cows in Daura and talks about them all the time. But the perception is that Mr. President is a little bit biased because these are his people that are involved, and that instead of facing the fact that in the 21st century there's really no room for the cattle rearing in the way we're doing it and coming up with modern ways of cattle rearing, we're trying to hold on to an old-fashioned way of rearing meat.
No, but you pointed out already. Let me be Mr. President's counsel. You pointed out already that he has his cattle in a ranch, in a farm. I don't think that's old-fashioned. Mm-hmm. That I think is that is current. That you have your somewhere. But I think that the matter really is one, as I said, that is within the province of the National Economic Council. And that's why the governors took it up. Because the federal government cannot determine what will happen in any state, because the states themselves pass laws on their land and the use of their land. We don't have land except federal land. So there's really no way that we can do much with that. And that's why we decided to hold the National Economic Council meetings, set up a committee on the Livestock Transformation Plan, and we're working with the state governments. And many of the state governments have given land for purposes of ranching. They've given land for as grazing areas. We are building earth dams in many of the different states. And I'm the chairman of that particular committee.
Now, the thing is this, though. When you think in terms of the problem that farmers and herders are going through, it's a problem that goes beyond the right of way, because obviously there's issues around climate change. And I am still a little bit confused about what the government policy is that underpins, the way we deal with issues around climate, which are sort of the long-term things that you must look at if you have to come up with a solution that is going to last.
I think that is precisely the point that is being made. That let me explain, perhaps I need to go into a bit more detail about the work of the National Economic Council on this livestock transformation plan. As I said, the reason why we had to constitute the governors into where we had to constitute ourselves into a committee, was precisely because we recognized that the reason why we have all these clashes between herdsmen and farmers is because of desertification. It's because of all of the conflicts over pasture and water. A lot of that is climate change related. Now, every state controls territory. Every state controls land. And under the Land Use Act, it is the state governor that has absolute control over the land of his state. It is the state governor that gives you permission, even the federal government. Whatever you want to do on their land, they must give you development control permit, even if it's on federal land, if you have any land that's federal. Now, that's why we sat with the state governors, and we decided that, look, this is an issue that's almost seasonal, and it's getting worse now because of desertification. Now there's some, especially coming from the Sahel.
So I guess the question I was trying to ask was whether there's a policy around desertification and climate change and what the government is doing to mitigate these things.
Of course. Of course, clearly there is. And one of the major policies is what is called the Green Wall Project. We have the Green Wall Project, basically to control desertification coming from the Sahel. The Ministry of Environment has been working on that for years. Now, the other issue, of course, is that we're also cooperating with our neighbors on desertification issues. That's our neighbors in the northern part in North Africa. We're also cooperating with northern part of West Africa, Niger, Chad, etc. And then there's also the project to recharge the Lake Chad, because that's one of the very important projects. And Mr. President is the one who particularly pushed the Lake Chad project, to recharge it, because, as you know, the Lake Chad has almost completely shrunk from about 35,000 square meters to about 1,300 or so square meters. So we need to recharge the Lake Chad from the Congo Basin, and that's one of the projects.
Okay, before we go for a break, I want you to just quickly clarify for me, what is the federal government policy therefore when it comes to mitigating this conflict? Is it to have ranches, or is it to continue having these grazing corridors? Is it a mixture of the two?
For now, what we have is a mixture. What we have is a mixture now, but ultimately, what the governors are saying, in that in their respective states, they will provide for those who want to do the business of ranching sufficient space to do so. In the interim, they are building earth dams so that cattle coming from the north, especially going towards the river banks, and you find that a lot of these conflicts are in those areas, are able to, even before they get anywhere near there, are able to access earth dams, water from the earth dams, access veterinary care, and all of that. So the long-term plan, of course, is to eventually create ranches, but ranches have to be privately owned. Government cannot create ranches. But at the moment, you can't just suddenly one day say, no more grazing, that's the end of it. Immediately, that doesn't happen anywhere. And in all of the places where the problem has been solved, because the Governor's Council, that committee, we studied it very carefully. We looked at everywhere where the problem has been solved. And it was a gradual process. It's that same gradual process that we're going through.
Okay, we will take a quick break. Don't go away.
A popular saying in Nigeria goes that at the time a cockerel matures, it begins to crow to tell the world the time of day. This makes a crucial premise for all of us who have come of age, the youths, to lend our voices to a nation set to flip a new page, like the chance to vote and be voted for, whether being a youth, a woman, or a person with disability, and to do this in unity. And to anyone who hasn't been confident enough to exercise these rights, I beg, step out of the dark and come into the light. I mean, your participating in the electoral process is significant, a moment to behold, like that cock crowing in the morning to tell about a difference. No sit down, look. Do something that will count today and be in tomorrow's books. The elections are coming. Register for and get your voter's card, your power card. As a citizen, and especially as a young lady or lad, lend your voice, use your voice, talk, say, and tell the world the time of day.
The beauty of democracy rests in the power the system has given to the teeming population to elect an eligible candidate of their choice for any political office. But the right to vote is not a license to kill. Democracy is government of the people, by the people, for the people, where majority carries the vote. It is not a do-or-die affair. Say no to violence. Your weapon at the poll is your permanent voter's card, not a dagger. Your future is in your hands. You have the right to leave. Don't cause trouble. Vote wisely.
My name is Natu Baba, and some people they say I be superstar. But to me, the real superstars are the people where they go vote for the candidate of their choice without violence. You understand? So for this upcoming election, be my superstar. Go out, go vote. No fighting, no violence. Because election will be war.
The Candidates, a presidential town hall co-production between Daria Media and NTA, supported by the MacArthur Foundation. Kingsley Moghalu and running mate Omar Getso of the Young Progressive Party, Muhammadu Buhari and running mate Yemi Osinbajo of the All Progressives Congress, Omoyele Sowore and running mate Rabiu Ahmed Rufai of the African Action Congress, Atiku Abubakar and running mate Peter Obi of the People's Democratic Party. Moderator Kadri Ahmed. Next town hall, Wednesday, 23rd January, with Omoyele Sowore and running mate Rabiu Ahmed Rufai of the African Action Congress. Town hall venue, Sheraton Hotel, Abuja, from 7 to 9 p.m. The candidates will be broadcast live on NTA and other partner TV and radio stations, as well as streamed online on NTA and dtv.media. If you're over 18 and want to be part of the audience, apply online at daria.media or use the hashtag NGTheCandidates or participate online using the hashtag NGTheCandidates.
Welcome back to the candidates. President Muhammadu Buhari and Vice President Yemi Osinbajo, candidates of the ruling APC in the forthcoming presidential elections, are here answering questions on what they have to offer Nigeria and her citizens if they are elected into office again. Before the break, I got handed a few questions from people, at home. So I'm just going to ask one of those questions, and then maybe Mr. President can answer that alongside a question that was asked previously on corruption. So Ms. Abisoye Balogun says, what does the President want to do with the funds recovered by the EFCC? So we've had situations where the EFCC has recovered funds which are thought to be from corrupt activities. And so the question from someone at home is that, what are you planning to do with those funds?
Well, I think the government made a statement on that. Firstly, by asking that there should be TSA, Treasury Single Account, so that all monies, either as revenue or from recovered from corrupt people, will go through one single account, so that it can be accounted for and how it is taken away. I think I have already made a statement on that issue, and what we are doing is that the extreme deficit in infrastructure, that money will be put, for the infrastructure, the roads, the rail, power, but it will go along with budgeting, which means initially the National Assembly, when they approve the budget, whatever deficit is likely to happen will be funded from that money.
Mr. Vice President, as a lawyer, I'd like to actually ask you, because some people have actually suggested that where a forfeiture has happened without a conviction, it might be problematic spending that money. What is the legal position?
Well, the legal position is that once there's a final forfeiture, the asset already belongs to the state. So frankly, I can't understand what sort of problem would arise so long as there has been a final forfeiture.
Because, you know, we are having cases where people are not fully charged and no conviction has taken place, but they're being made to return money.
Yes.
So it's in those cases I'm talking about.
Yes. When a person returns, for example, we found cases where assets were returned, where houses were returned, or in some cases where there are houses and all of that. And what we do is that we advertise. We say, if this belongs to you and you have a legal claim to it, even if it was seized from you, if you have a legal claim, show the legal claim. Show that it was purchased by, you know, legal means and all that. If not, it will be forfeited to the state. There's a complete procedure of forfeiture, which is under the existing laws, the ICPC laws, the EFCC laws. There's a complete process. And those processes are what we follow very strictly. And once there's a final forfeiture order by a court, that's the end of it. There are situations where people return assets, where they return funds, you know. Those funds that are returned are voluntarily returned. Because if for example, $1 billion is found in your account, and you earn only 500,000 naira a month, then clearly there's some explanation you need to make. Most people would rather voluntarily return the fund rather than go into any arguments with the EFCC. And in such cases, we simply forfeit.
So what is the basis for deciding who you're going to prosecute and who you're going to just allow to just return funds? Because we've had a mixed bag. We've had people who've had assets taken away from them and they're walking the streets. Nothing has happened to them. We have people whose assets have been seized and they're being tried. What is the rationale that determines who gets persecuted and who walks away?
Let me say straight away that there is no distinction. The mere fact that someone has returned assets doesn't mean that they are free and can walk away. And there are so many people walking the streets who are on trial, by the way, you know, because you are on bail almost within, you know, days of your being brought before the court. So that's not the problem. What happens, though, is this. What a prosecutor does is to say, for example, that if you return money, I might decide as a prosecutor to make you a prosecution witness rather than be an accused person. If, for example, there's a fraud involving 5, 6 people, if you charge all of them, you're not going to find evidence because unless you get each of them to make a confessional statement, and the confessional statement only inculpates the person who has made that statement. So you must find 1 or 2 of them who will be able to give evidence. So you might say, okay, of these 6, I'm going to decide to make 2 of them who are probably, you know, more or less guilty of the same offense or responsible for the same misconduct. But 1 or 2 of them will be prosecution witnesses. So that's really the way it goes.
Okay. Let me bring Mr. President in because I want to switch gear a little bit and start talking about security, right? Mr. President, we've had people say that Boko Haram has been technically defeated. And yet a technically defeated Boko Haram is killing soldiers in the northeast. What is going wrong with your fight against Boko Haram?
Well, I think the best people that really answer that question are people from the northeast. That means Yobe, Borno, Bauchi, Adamawa. You see, when this administration came in, Boko Haram was holding 17 local governments in the northeast. They are not holding any local government now. So they have resorted, you know, to indoctrinating young people, especially girls, wrap them up with explosives and dispatch them to soft targets, churches, mosques, marketplaces, motor parks. But the best you can get about the performance of this administration vis-a-vis stopping that Boko Haram occupation of Nigeria is when you visit Maiduguri or beyond. People go back to the land they are farming. They go back to the office. They can drive from Maiduguri to Kano virtually any time of the day. which wasn't happening when we came in. And as I said, I still feel that you, the press, should do more research and not just going and staying in a hotel in Maiduguri. Try to go to try to go to Munguno and talk to the people.
But there's no doubt, though, that we've seen an increase in attacks against the military in particular by Boko Haram. In the last 6 months, we've had 2 major military installations attacked and soldiers killed. Are you at all concerned with this focus or new focus that Boko Haram seems to have, which is basically targeting military targets, and the success they've actually had in killing hundreds of soldiers in the last few months?
You see, thank goodness, if you have a background of military training, that when you don't fight any conventional war, now that they are putting tactics of terrorists, they choose their targets. They choose the time, they choose where to attack, at which time. With that, you have to be highly mobile, you have to have very good communication, and we have resources limitations, because a lot of Nigerians don't feel that we are in an emergency, that the military needs a lot more money for equipment, a lot more money, for spare parts, for communications, and so on. But Boko Haram, certainly, they are being supported by forces outside Nigeria.
Now, you talked about resources. I think since coming into government, my total calculation is that you've spent something like, or you've budgeted, let me not use the word spend, you've budgeted something like 1.8 trillion for defense. And yet, that's the number I have. I might be wrong.
That's wrong. That's very wrong.
Okay, we'll cross-check and make sure. But I was told my research showed over the last 3 years, I'm talking about 3 years, 1.8 trillion. So not one budget recycle from 2015 to date. Yeah, 1.8 trillion. And yet we have soldiers complaining about a lack of equipment. We have soldiers, last year we saw Maiduguri Airport demonstration by soldiers who felt they were not being looked after. And so the question is really, as Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, how much are you holding the leadership of the Army accountable, given the complaints we're getting from the rank and file about welfare?
I received weekly situation report from the military in the front. It's extremely difficult, to accuse, the soldiers of going to the extent of demonstrating. But the consequences of that now was that the Army Command has to put investigation, court-martial officers and men for demonstrating, because soldiers are not supposed to demonstrate. And then the action the military is taking against in the front line, let me call it Maiduguri the front line or the north, is not normally given to the press. Because on the trial, those who have been tried, if they are not found guilty, they are supposed to be reabsorbed and posted out. But those found guilty are sentenced by the court-martial. And this is being done.
Okay, so the concern, though, for ordinary Nigerians is that soldiers appear to be getting punished for being whistleblowers, for indicating that all is not well with the military hierarchy, and that the military hierarchy is not spending the money that it is allocated on soldiers and their welfare. Are you not concerned at all about that?
Certainly I'm concerned. where we get officers who short-changing troops, either misappropriating their ration accounts or they are not paying them in time. But one of the things I did when I came back clearly, and I got the governor of the central bank involved, was that as far north in the country, there are banks. And soldiers are allowed to open 2 accounts. One, where their families are, and make a written allocation. And then they take the balance wherever they are. And that was being done. So we foresaw that because the experience I had in my military service, to make sure that there is no longer pay on the table. So that paymasters cannot shortchange them.
So you're not convinced that there's anything untoward going on with the military budget? That's what it sounds like, that you're not convinced that there's a case to be answered by the hierarchy of the military. That's what it sounds like.
Well, the system, I believe the system is still working. Otherwise, there would have been a complete breakdown. The system is working, but it's much more difficult. And don't forget, there are soldiers that think they should only wear a uniform to get the security, mainly the material security, salary, allowances, and accommodation for the family. If you ask them to go to the front, they will put the gun down and disappear.
Yeah, but isn't part of the problem is that not many people feel that Nigeria is a country they can now sacrifice for. People do not feel like Nigeria is looking after them, and therefore they can look after Nigeria.
No, that's not even fair.
Why do you say that's not fair?
No, that's not true. If you look at the sheer number of Nigerian troops that have died, have laid their lives on the line, and we just recently celebrated the Remembrance Day, the commitment of Nigerian troops to this country is unparalleled. There's nowhere else in the world to say any suggestion at all that the Nigerian troops are not prepared to lay down their lives for the country is certainly not the case at all.
And I think that's certainly the case for the majority, but we are also saying there are soldiers. If you go on social media, there are videos of soldiers complaining about the fact that they're not being looked after, that they don't have boots. And, and that the demonstration, certainly in Maiduguri, was not something that journalists manufactured. These were soldiers protesting their terms of engagement. And so the question is, are there things that are going wrong within the military and which this government, for whatever reason, seems really reluctant to investigate? Because we've not heard of anybody saying, this is enough concern for us to do something about it.
No, but frankly, my take on that is that if there are issues, if, for example, they are assuming that there is any misappropriation of government funds, there's a process, there's a clear process for ensuring that that is not the case. And if people are found responsible, we've had investigations on military spending, and if people are found to be guilty of those things, they will be prosecuted properly. I think that's it.
Okay. There's Amma Mata Suleiman. She had a question to ask Mr. President. Is she in the crowd? No? Okay, we'll take a few more questions. On security, please. If you have questions on other things, can you wait until a little bit later? Let's finish with the issue of security now. Questions on security? Yes, sir. The gentleman over there. The gentleman right at the back, and then maybe the one right at the back there in blue. Yes. If you just come and line up, please. Yes.
Good evening, Mr. President. It's an honor for me to be here this evening. I think we've done very well. My name is Andrew Ogboro. I think we've done very well in the last 4 years by the numbers. We are the world poorest. We have 13 million out of school. There is poverty. There is hunger. Our universities are on strike. Now, I am tailoring it along the 3 items in which the campaigns were held: corruption, security, and the economy. We've taken corruption, and I understand how we are fighting that corruption, because we've just been told the former Babachir Lawal has been fired, but still he's part of the campaign, so I understand corruption. On security, I have also heard now that until we get more money, we will be where we are. So now I also understand security. So please, I also want to understand the economy, so I can go home and tell myself whether to come out and vote or not. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you so much. My name is David Obinna Anyele. I work with Center for Citizens with Disabilities. I'm also the president of Nigerian Sitting Volleyball Federation. Sir, I'm talking about security. Our soldiers went to the war front, in particular in Northeast, and many of them are injured. Specifically, many of them suffered disability. In March 21st, 2015, Mr. President, you promised in Lafia, Nasarawa State, that you are going to support and work with the National Assembly to sign the disability bill if they send it to you. On the 18th of December 2018, the National Assembly transmitted the disability bill to your office. Sir, my question, how do you protect these Nigerian soldiers that have suffered disability by signing a law that will protect them from discrimination and harmful practices? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good evening, Mr. President and Mr. Vice President. My name is Ayo Oyalo. Firstly, before I ask my question, I need to correct one impression now. The video you're talking about is a fake news. That's an old video of 2015 that has been, 2014, that has been disproved. So that needs to be corrected. Now, to talk about security, first and foremost, the president has said clearly about people spending 16 billion on power, and we don't have the power yet. So my question is, Mr. President, if you are re-elected, do you have any plan to deal with such people? Because the truth is, if people continue to steal and they get away with it and nothing is done, then people will continue to steal. So what is your plan to deal with people who have stolen Nigeria patrimony and are still walking free if you come back?
Thank you.
I'd like to intervene.
Yes.
I'd like to intervene on the question that Mr. Oboru asked.
Okay.
Because it really has to do with the economy, the question of poverty and all of that, and where we are today, just so that Mr. Oboru can vote. Mr. Oboru, let me take the question on Nigeria being the poorest. Now, if you look at the MBS figures, that's the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics figures, as of 2012, Nigeria had 112 million people in extreme poverty. 2012. If you look at the figures today, going by those same figures, they say about 86 million, but higher than India. Now let me explain, and let me put this in perspective. From 2010 to 2014, Nigeria earned the highest ever from oil revenues. In 4 years, Nigeria earned 383 billion. Yet, poverty figures went from about 82 million to 112 million in 2012, and the numbers continued. That's the reason why we had a poverty problem. Unfortunately, with the resources we had, poverty was not addressed. Poverty doesn't disappear overnight. When people are poor, they remain poor unless the government does something about it. Nothing was done, despite the highest revenues in our history. In 3 years of our own government, 3 years, 94 billion is what we made from oil revenues. Compare that to 383 billion. Oil at some point was 110 to 114, and we had poverty figures of 112. Now, what did we do from the point of view of the economy to alleviate poverty? We started the largest program for social investment in the history of this country. That's why we have the conditional cash transfers. We're giving the poorest people in our country today 5,000 naira every month. We are only able to give we're hoping we'll be able to give about 1 million to start with. But in order to prevent stark poverty and malnutrition, we're doing our homegrown school feeding. We're feeding 9.2 million children every single day in public primary schools. Aside from that, the trader money and market money that we're doing, the trader money and market money, these are loans to the poorest. And let me give you an example of the trader money. Trader money, we're doing... Yes.
About the fact... Can you hear me now? Yes. You talked about the 2012 figures of poverty, how it's 100. So what has happened in the world is that it used to be that extreme poverty was measured at people who live on less than $1 a day. It's now less than $2 a day. And maybe that might explain the differences in the numbers that you've quoted.
No. I'm not even quoting those numbers to show that what I'm merely saying is not that poverty has reduced considerably. No.
It seems to have increased.
I'm saying, no. I'm saying that what has happened now is that we're dealing with the issue of poverty. We're now dealing with it. When we earned money, when we earned a lot of money, there was no program. The program that was in place, the Sure P program, who can point to a sensible beneficiary? Who can point to a credible Sure P program that alleviated poverty? Who can? Let me finish the point that I'm making. Now, with the trader money, for example, I'll give you just one example. We're giving 2 million market women. We're giving 2 million of them loans starting with 10,000 naira. These are petty traders. Some of them, their inventory is not more than 2,000 naira. We give them 10,000 naira. When they pay back, automatically, electronically, they get 15,000. When they pay back, they get 20,000. And it goes all the way up to 100. And we're going to give 2 million people. All of that is 20 billion naira. Just 20 billion naira. Now, let me tell you what. There was a government in this country where $292 million was withdrawn weeks to the elections. Weeks to the elections. Another 40 billion was withdrawn weeks to the election. We have all the evidence. We've shown the evidence. Poverty at that time was still at 112. Today, we're spending a mere 20 billion for 2 million people. If you calculate just $100 million, that today's money is 36 billion naira. If they had spent that 36 billion naira, more people would have moved out of poverty before we took office in 2015.
Okay, let us
not talk. So when we talk about poverty today, you can't. India had a plan to get its people out of poverty. That's how come India has even overtaken us. The first plan to get people out of poverty, a credible plan, is what we have in place. We're spending 500 billion. We're spending 500 billion in our budget. Poverty doesn't disappear. You've got to deal with it. And that's exactly what we're doing. We are dealing with it on a daily basis. We have a credible program. We're ensuring that that program works. And that's how it's done. Okay. All of today, isn't it incredible? And Mr. Ogboro, you too should find it completely incredible that people who squandered the kind of money, when oil was $100 a barrel, poverty was at 112 million extremely poor. Those same people today come and ask the sorts of questions and say, oh, but we're still poor. We're poor because nobody took the trouble to get people out of poverty. Okay. And that's what we're doing today.
We have to take a quick break, but before we do, a quick question. Again and again, when we talk to people in government, you keep talking about 16 years of PDP. For many Nigerians, the PDP and APC are two sides of the same coin, simply because you got so many PDP people in APC and now some APC people have gone to PDP, and PDP people have come to APC. What is the difference, really, between you and the people you've replaced?
I think there's a huge difference. I think there's a massive difference. At the core of any political party, at the core of the political party, is an ideology, is a philosophy. At the core of the APC, whether you have some people coming in from PDP or coming in from elsewhere, at the core is what our manifesto speaks about. Our manifesto speaks about the social development of Nigeria, in particular, looking at issues of the ordinary Nigerian. How do we lift the ordinary Nigerian out of poverty? That has been our focus. That guides everything we do. It guides our budgets. It guides the way we develop our budget. It guides the way we think. It guides our economic recovery and growth plan. At the core, there must be a core. Membership of a political party is open to everybody. People are going to come from anywhere, but you must have a core belief. And we have a core belief. That core belief is what has seen us doing our social investment program, is what has seen us investing in infrastructure, despite earning 60% less than previous governments.
Okay.
We're investing the largest amount of money ever in the history of this country in infrastructure.
Okay.
Yes.
It's time for another break. We won't be away for too long, so please stay with us.
The beauty of democracy rests in the power the system has given to the teeming population to elect an eligible candidate of their choice for any political office. But the right to vote is not a license to kill. Democracy is government of the people, by the people, for the people, where majority carries the vote. It is not a do-or-die affair. Say no to violence. Your weapon at the poll is your permanent voter's card, not a dagger. Your future is in your hands. You have the right to leave. Don't cause trouble. Vote wisely.
I tell you, man, music is the most powerful force for this world. As better jam they flow, now so everybody will feel and they rock out. You know, as a musician, I see this thing every time I dey stage they perform. You know, everybody will just scatter body. You know, even when you bought yourself when they form, that's when they feel like say you don't even touch yourself. Before you know, music don't they move there, they don't enter that side. You know, that time it don't matter which political party where you dey or the person where they support. It don't matter. So why? It no fit be the same on election day. Why we no fit just go, jejely go vote without throwing blow, throwing stone, carry stick, carry machete, curse everybody. So just remember, say after all the political wahala and the brouhaha finish, we go still go back with the rock correct music together.
A popular saying in Nigeria goes that at the time a cockerel matures, it begins to crow to tell the world the time of day. This makes a crucial premise for all of us who have come of age, the youths, to lend our voices to a nation set to flip a new page, like the chance to vote and be voted for, whether being a youth, a woman, or a person with disability, and to do this in unity. And to anyone who hasn't been confident enough to exercise these rights, I beg, step out of the dark and come into the light. I mean, your participating in the electoral process is significant, a moment to behold, like that cock crowing in the morning to tell about a difference. No sit down, look. Do something that will count today and be in tomorrow's books. The elections are coming. Register for and get your voter's card, your power card. As a citizen, and especially as a young lady or lad, lend your voice, use your voice, talk, say, and tell the world the time of day.
The Candidates, a presidential town hall co-production between Daria Media and NTA, supported by the MacArthur Foundation. Kingsley Moghalu and running mate Omar Getso of the Young Progressive Party, Muhammadu Buhari and running mate Yemi Osinbajo of the All Progressives Congress, Omoyele Sowore and running mate Rabiu Ahmed Rufai of the African Action Congress, Atiku Abubakar and running mate Peter Obi of the People's Democratic Party. Moderator Kadria Ahmed. Next town hall, Wednesday, 23rd January, with Omoyele Sowore and running mate Rabiu Ahmed Rufai of the African Action Congress. Town hall venue, Sheraton Hotel, Abuja, from 7 to 9 p.m. The candidates will be broadcast live on NTA and other partner TV and radio stations, as well as streamed online on NTA and DTV.media. If you're over 18 and want to be part of the audience, apply online at daria.media or use the hashtag NGTheCandidates or participate online using the hashtag NGTheCandidates.
Welcome back. You are watching The Candidates, brought to you by Daria Media and the Nigeria Television Authority with the support of the MacArthur Foundation. We've got a number of questions, Mr. President, so I'll read a few and then come back to you. There was a question that we didn't get to addressing, which was on whether you have any special plans different to the plans you have now to deal with people who are corrupt and are walking around freely if you are re-elected into office. There was the issue of the connection between corruption and infrastructure. I don't know if you want to talk to that. And I'm going to ask two more questions, and then we'll take them together. The gentleman or lady who wrote this didn't say their name, but they said that there are some categories of military retirees who fought on the Nigerian side during the Biafran War and are yet to get any form of pension because they didn't complete the number of years to be entitled to pension, whereas their counterparts who fought on the Biafran side against Nigeria are receiving pensions because they were pardoned. Is there any plan to address this? And then the final question, because we're talking about corruption again, why has your government remained silent about the corruption allegations against the governor of Kano State, Abdullahi Ganduje? And why have we even seen you standing next to him at a rally? So, 3 questions. These are all directed at Mr. President.
It's to me.
So corruption, yes, let me recap again just to remind you. The first is corruption and infrastructure.
Yes, well, fighting corruption, I think I have already made a comment on that much earlier on. But the important thing is that you cannot catch Nigerian on paper because we have got all the regulations laid down in the ministries, in the parastatals themselves, government offices. So it's a question of effective supervision. Effective supervision using the accountant general, the auditor general, to make sure that budgets are studied and then accounts, are checked and making sure that those who mismanage public funds are punished. I think this government, as I said about a week ago, I will have to ask EFCC and ICPC to make a comprehensive, submission to the public about what has been recovered and from whom. People are voluntarily bringing money, and we are seeking the cooperation of the United States and Europe to please help us recover assets from those countries. These are quite detailed and are documented, and I think we have to, it's high time we go to public with it to show that how much is recovered. And with TSA, that amount of money, nobody can remove them unless we do it through the budget and through the office of the president.
So in other words, Mr. President, the question here was trying to find out whether you would do anything new. You're saying you're going to carry on with the same strategy if you are re-elected in terms of the fight against corruption. Because I think the questioner was trying to find out if you had other plans in addition to what you're doing now, if you come back as president. Okay, so the questioner was trying to find out if in addition to what you are doing today to fight corruption, there are plans to do more if you are elected into office again, or whether it's going to be more of the same strategy.
I think that is quite obvious. Okay. As I said, we are following a tedious way of doing it. we have to go through the documents. We are lucky the banks are cooperating, and we go and find out people who were living beyond their means, or where contracts were given for projects and they were not executed, or are not executed according to signed agreements on specifications and so on. And that takes time, because what we found out is a nasty process. You get a determined Nigerian patriotic, pass through university, this is NYSC. If he served 5 years under a crook, he eventually becomes a crook. And we cut the top, we removed permanent secretary, we removed some directors, but these people that are coming up, some of them were involved in mismanagement of resources. I find this problem extremely difficult, and we have got the legal problem. Unless you have got your documents through the banks, through companies, and you take them to the court, you are not going to get any decision.
So you're sounding as if you're a little bit frustrated at the slow pace of what you see as your fight against corruption.
You said?
Are you getting a little bit frustrated by the slow pace of the fight?
I can't afford to get frustrated. I keep on telling the law enforcement agencies, and the administrators in the ministries, it's their own responsibility, to document mismanagement, and if it has to come to presidency, let him do it. I can't ask, to be elected, on security, economy, and fighting corruption. And then I get frustrated because some people are not cooperating. I cannot afford.
So there was the second question about Governor Abdullahi Ganduje of Kano, and why we have not heard you make any comment on this matter. And people are surprised they saw you on a podium with him, raising his hand and campaigning with him.
No, that's not true.
No, I will defend myself on that. I haven't gone to Kano yet.
Right.
I have just gone to Kogi today, in my venue. That clip, somebody brought it me, how the governor of Kano State was receiving dollars and smiling and putting it in his pocket. I don't know the extent of technology used, and I can't understand it. Now, because the State Assembly has taken it, they have gone to court, I decided, not to talk about it. And the State Assembly, constitutionally, they could have dealt with that. But then again, the matter was taken to court.
Okay, but what are your thoughts about that video? Do you have any personal thoughts? Do you believe that video is fake, or do you believe it is legitimate?
You can't say.
No.
He can talk for himself.
He doesn't know.
As I told you, I have seen the clip. I don't know how much technology was used, but can Ganduje fail to trust somebody to get the money to him? He has to take it directly himself, smiling. I honestly am completely overwhelmed, and the system has given me some relief. It is in the court, it is in the State Assembly, so let them as much as possible deal with it. But Kano, this thing has received a lot of publicity, and I hope by the time I go on my campaign for re-election, there will be some answers from the courts or the State Assembly in Kano State about the performance of that.
The final question, Mr. President, that I read earlier is to do with the military retirees. Can we please have some silence? Sorry, apologies. Yeah. So the question on military retirees who fought on the side of Nigeria but who didn't serve the requisite number of years and so are not receiving pensions, even though their counterparts, the same story, but they served on the side of Biafra, got pardoned and therefore are able to access pension. That, do you have any plans for those Nigerian soldiers and how to help them access their pension?
We are extremely concerned about the morale of not only soldiers, but retired people. I think if you are following up, about 3 weeks ago, 2 to 3 weeks ago, what we did with the Nigerian Airways workers. We paid them, and I know the military, they are conducting checks through military hospitals and record offices about people who are retired. And I think payments are being made, even to the families of the deceased. There has been so much fraud, from records, to physical, even wounded soldiers, those who were incapacitated. And this government is going back to the records, checking with the hospitals, checking with units and the record officers about soldiers. And I believe of recent, what we have done with the airways workers and so on, we are doing it in the military. It was a continuous exercise. And I believe the military are having confidence that now they are being looked after, especially the ones that were injured and they became disabled. We are revisiting all that.
Okay, so since we're talking about disability, there was a question asked about a bill that was transmitted to you, the disability bill, which you have not signed.
About?
The disability bill that was transmitted to you by the National Assembly and which you haven't signed. Do you want to respond to that? It was asked by a gentleman.
Yeah. Injured and rehabilitation.
No, the disability bill. The one sent to the National Assembly.
Yes.
But
disability bill.
It's been sent to the president.
I think we sent to the National Assembly.
They returned it to you.
I'm not aware of that.
It's been returned.
No. Even as of Wednesday, there was a demonstration in front of the National Assembly where they were saying that they were giving the National Assembly 7 days to transmit the bill to us, to the presidency. I'm not aware of that.
Okay.
We're not aware.
Yeah, let me quickly ask you a few questions on the economy because we are running out of time and we have to round up very, very quickly. You are the chair, of course, of the National Council on the Economy.
I can't hear you well.
You are the chair of the National Council on the Economy. So yes. I want to direct this particular question to you, and it's been coming in through various means as well. When you came into government in 2015, you essentially came into office and there was an economy that was growing. Not long after that, we entered negative growth and then recession. How do you explain inheriting a robust economy and then going into a recession?
Well, I think it's a very good question. But let me tell you, first of all, that as of 2013, the Minister of Finance, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, the then Minister of Finance, had already indicated clearly that the country was going into a recession. As of 2014, we were already going into about 3% growth, 4% as of 2015. As of the time when we took over office, it was very clear the direction that the economy of the country was going. At that time, we had external reserves of about $28 billion, when we were at the time earning between $100 and $114 a barrel. If you look at the figures, if you look at the growth figures were actually declining as of 2014, 2015. So it wasn't a question of the growth figures going up as of 2015 when we took over office. As a matter of fact, it was in decline. Now, what worsened the situation is that you would have expected that in the periods in the periods of prosperity, the 4 years preceding, when we earned $383 billion US dollars, that there will be some savings. Even the finance minister then, Okonjo-Iweala, complained that there were no savings and that there ought to have been savings. And there are several other people who have admitted that they ought to have put some money aside. When we came into office, oil was at $28 a barrel, down from an up of 100 to 114. And then we were losing production in the Niger Delta. We were losing up to 1 million barrels a day. So we were in a situation where the economy was already on a downward slide, no savings whatsoever. We were losing on production. So clearly, I mean, for a country that was solely earning money from oil, and when your oil is down to $28 a barrel, you are not producing up to 1 million, clearly you are going to enter into recession.
Okay, so
Yeah.
those are valid
Yes.
points to make, but the argument has been that we kind of knew it was coming, and our way of handling it, particularly the confusing policies of the CBN at the time, eroded the CBN, eroded confidence, and so led to capital flight and a whole bunch of other issues, thereby making a bad situation much worse. You take no responsibility at all.
I don't agree with you. You see, the point of the matter is that it's easy to advance a point of view and say that that point of view is responsible for what we saw. And the point I was making to you is that there was a steady decline. Obviously, if the CBN took the view, for example, that at $28 billion in our external reserves, we have to rationalize foreign exchange in order to ensure that only those things that we needed could be imported. That's the point of view that they took. I think that whichever way you chose to slice it, we probably would have ended up in much the same place. What we did in order to be able to improve our circumstances was first to say, for agriculture, we decided that, look, from importing $5 million of rice every single day, we want to be self-sufficient in rice. So today, we're practically self-sufficient in rice. We're importing only 2% of what we used to import as of 2014. So, and we've saved so far $24 billion. Sorry, just give me a second. Just give me a second.
Okay.
Compared to 2014, when we were earning $100 to $114 a barrel on oil, with 28 billion in foreign reserve, we have foreign reserve today in excess of 40 billion, earning 60% less. So I think we deserve, to a certain extent, we deserve, some bit of accolades for that.
Just two quick questions. Are you at all concerned that over 20% of our budget, something like, I think, 2 million, just goes on interest to pay loans? Because that has been something that people has looked at as an indicator of the fact that our economy is a little bit less than healthy. That's number one. Then number two, on the issue of rice.
On the issue of
rice. There is some suggestion that there's a lot of smuggling of rice through our porous borders, and that's why the official numbers have actually gone down, but that we're actually still bringing in rice. It's just not coming through official channels.
Okay. All right.
Yes, sir.
Let me take the first question on debt.
Yes.
With debt, the question that you need to ask is, what are you borrowing for? Every country in the world that wants to make serious development, that wants to undergo some serious development, borrows money. We, at the moment, our debt to GDP is one of the lowest in the world. It's about 20%. And if you look at comparator countries, Ethiopia is in excess of 50%. Ghana, that people cite, is in excess of 60%. Several countries of the world, 70 and above. We are still very low debt to GDP. Now the point of the matter,
the DMO,
yes,
for example, the recommendations that they've made about sort of the percentages we're already way over those recommendations. Is that not a problem?
No. Let me tell you, let me explain so that you'll understand this better. Now, what you put aside to service your debt, right, the question you need to ask is, what are you spending on? What we are spending on is infrastructure. So that in itself is meant to generate revenue, is meant to do well for the economy. So we're building the Lagos-Kano Rail. Our counterpart funding, we put on the table, our whole counterpart funding. We've done Alajawari, we completed Abuja, Kaduna, we completed the light rail within Abuja here. Lagos Ibadan Expressway, we're doing it. Second Niger Bridge. These are borrowings that we took and we ensured that they were for infrastructure. And for the first time in about 10 years, we're spending almost 30% of our revenues on capital, on infrastructure. So clearly, if you talk about borrowing, you know, people talk about borrowing as if, oh, it's an individual that's borrowing. A government, a country, borrows and uses, what a country does is that you need to use your GDP. You need to consider what your GDP is. The problem that we sometimes have is what is called revenue, debt to revenue. In other words, we are not making enough money from revenues. In other words, from taxes, we're not getting enough money. It is higher than ever before, as you've seen from the figures. From oil, we should be earning more. From other sources, we should be earning more. So really what we should be doing, and this is what the government has been working on consistently, is earning more. So we have a debt to revenue issue. In other words, what we should be earning is much less than what our debt is. But fortunately for us, most of our debt is local. Most of our debt is Naira because it's in treasury bills and all that. So we are not in any kind of danger, and we are borrowing right. We are borrowing for the right things. Okay. We are borrowing for infrastructure.
Well, we have very little time, so I'm going to ask Mr. President one question and then ask the two of you a single question. So, Mr. President, there has been a lot of speculation around your health. And the concern is that if you come and win a second term of office, whether you will be healthy enough to run. Are you okay? Will you be able to contest and run for office? That's number one. And the final question, and it's to the both of you, if you lose elections, will you accept and go back?
If what?
If you lose elections, will you accept the results?
Well, that sounds like if impossible. I think we have made our case, and I hope you will have time to watch my visits to Bauchi, to Kogi, and try and watch the other visits to the states, and then see whether I'm fit or not. The way I go around the stadium and respond to the cheers of voters and explain our position and explain to them where we found the country when we came 2015, where we are now, what we were able to do in between with the resources available to us. And I'm very, very satisfied with the reaction from the real voters.
But still, if something happens and you lose elections, will you accept the results?
That wouldn't be the first time I lose the election. Don't forget. Don't forget. I tried 2003, and I was in court for 30 months. 2007, I was in court for 18 months. 2011, I was in court for 8 months. And I went up to Supreme Court. The third time, I said, God day. And the fourth time, God and technology came in. The PVC and card readers, you know, the opposition took it for granted. Before, what they used to do, sit down, look at constituencies or states, allot marks or allot seats in constituencies, and they say anybody who disagrees should go to court. Now, most of my voters are looking for the next meal. Where do they get money to go to court? So they say, God day. And eventually, God day.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Sadly, we have run out of time, and we have to leave it here. I'd like to thank Mr. President again and Mr. Vice President for making themselves available for this program. The next edition of the candidates will take place, God willing, in exactly 7 days, from 7 to 9 p.m. It will be a live show once more, and we'll be talking to the presidential and vice presidential candidates of the African Action Congress, Mr. Omoyele Sowore and Mr. Ahmed Rufai. Please join us. Until then, on behalf of the team at Daria Media, the Nigeria Television Authority, the MacArthur Foundation, and all of our other partners, we thank you for watching. Have a very good evening.